Phyllis Summers had always been numerous effects, unpredictable, brilliant, intrepid, but unnoticeable was no way one of them. So when she dissolved without a trace, it didn't just raise eyebrows in Genoa City, it burned a full-bloated extremity that transferred shockwaves through everyone who had ever crossed her path. One moment she was there, fiery and changeable as ever, and the coming, she was gone, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions and a silence that felt far too deliberate to be accidental. No calls, no dispatches, no dramatic farewell, just absence. And for those who knew Phyllis best, that was the most intimidating indication of all. Jack Abbott was the first to smell that commodity was deeply wrong. At first, he tried to explain it. Phyllis had a history of impulsive opinions, after all. Perhaps she demanded space. Perhaps she had taken off to clear her head. But as hours turned into a full day with no word, his instincts shifted from mild concern to a eating dread that settled deep in his casket. Jack had seen Phyllis at her worst and her stylish, and one thing he knew with certainty was that she no way faded still. Indeed, in chaos, she left a trail. This time, there was nothing. That scarified him. Billy Abbott, on the other hand, didn't bother with denial. The moment he heard Phyllis was missing, his response was immediate and explosive. He stormed into Jack's office, his agitation slightly contained, demanding answers that no bone sounded suitable to give. His mind contended through worst-case scripts, each darker than the last. Billy had his own complicated history with Phyllis's passion, treason, fidelity, resentment, but beneath it all was a connection that ran deeper than either of them liked to admit. And now, with her gone, that connection felt like a raw wimwams, exposed and palpitating with fear. "This isn't like her," Billy claimed, pacing like a boxed beast. "She doesn't just evaporate. Not without stirring commodity over first." Jack didn't argue. He couldn't. Because Billy was right. Together, the sisters began making together the last given moments before Phyllis faded. She had been seen the night before, tense, distracted, but not entirely out of character. There had been whispers of a battle, though no one could confirm with whom. Some said she had been arguing on the phone. Others claimed she looked like she was being followed. But nothing concrete, nothing solid enough to make a proposition on. Just fractions, like shards of a glass, reflecting a distorted interpretation of the verity. As the hours passed, the pressure escalated. Jack reached out to every contact he had, still pulling strings to gather information without drawing too important attention. Billy, less subtle, pushed harder, questioning anyone who might have seen or heard commodity, his intensity making people nervous. The further they searched, the further unsettling the situation came. There were no signs of struggle, no substantiation of a planned flight, no physical exertion that suggested she had left freely. It was as if she had been cancelled. And that possibility, hijacking, foul play, hung heavy in the air, implied but insolvable to ignore. Jack set up himself replaying his last discussion with Phyllis over and over again. Had he missed commodity? A hint, a warning, a cry for help hidden beneath her usual bravado? Remorse crept by, sharp and unforgiving. However, could he have stopped it? Could he have seen it coming? These questions visited him, each one digging deeper into his heart. If commodity had happened to her. Billy, meanwhile, refused to decelerate down. Where Jack leaned into strategy, Billy leaned into instinct. He began connecting blotches that may or may not have was, suspecting everyone from business rivals to old adversaries. And with Phyllis, there was no deficit of those. She had made a continuance of bold moves and dangerous choices, and now it sounded those choices might have caught up with her in the worst possible way. "What if this isn't arbitrary?" Billy said one night, his voice low but violent. What if someone eventually decided to take her down, for good? Jack didn't want to believe it, but he couldn't dismiss it moreover. As the disquisition strengthened, new details began to surface as small, disquieting pieces that only added to the riddle. A security camera near the last place Phyllis was seen had accessibly conked during the exact window of her exposure. Her phone had been turned off, its last signal reverberating from a position that led nowhere. And also there was the auto, her auto, set up abandoned on the side of a quiet road, keys still in the ignition, but no sign of her. That discovery hit Jack and Billy like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a robotic escape. This was commodity differently. Commodity calculated. Fear began to set in, not just for them, but for everyone connected to Phyllis. The reality was getting harder to deny. This was serious. Conceivably deadly serious. Jack tried to maintain control, to be the steady force everyone reckoned on, but cracks were starting to show. Late at night, when he was alone, the fear would creep in, suffocating and grim. He knew Phyllis. He knew her strength, her adaptability. But indeed the strongest people had limits, and if she was in peril, Billy, on the other hand, conducted his fear into wrathfulness. He came more aggressive, more reckless, pushing boundaries in his hunt for answers. He wasn't willing to stay for the verity to come to him, he was going to drag it into the light, no matter what it bring. Days passed, but the riddle only strengthened. Every lead sounded to end in a dead end. Every indication raised further questions than it answered. And through it all, one fact remained unchanged: Phyllis was gone. The query was unsupportable. For Jack, it was the not knowing that hurt the most. However, he demanded to know if commodity had happened to her. He demanded check, indeed, if it came with pain. But this limbo, this endless waiting, was its own kind of torture. For Billy, it was the helplessness. He abominated feeling helpless, abominated that no matter how hard he pushed, he couldn't force the verity to reveal itself. It went against everything he was. But neither of them was ready to give up. Because deep down, beneath the fear and the frustration, there was still hope. Hope that Phyllis was out there nearly alive. Hope that this story wasn't over yet. And hope that when the verity eventually came out, it would lead them back to her, before it was too late. The longer Phyllis remained missing, the further the situation shifted from intimidating to unbelievable. Genoa City had seen its fair share of dishonors, backstabbings, and shocking twists, but this felt different. This wasn't just another scheme or emotional fallout staying to explode into public drama. This was a void, a silence that refused to be filled, and it was beginning to consume everyone connected to her. Jack refused to let that silence palm. By the third day, he'd turned his concern into a full-scale, behind-the-scenes operation. Every connection he'd erected over the times, business associates, private investigators, indeed old favors owed, was now being called in. He kept effects discreet, not wanting to spark fear or rumors that could helical out of control, but his determination was unmistakable. Phyllis signified. And he wasn't about to sit back while she remained out of reach. Billy, meanwhile, had abandoned slyness altogether. However, Billy was flipping the board, if Jack was playing chess. He began digging into Phyllis's history with grim intensity, reconsidering old conflicts that numerous had long since buried. He questioned whether this exposure was truly about the present, or if it was vengeance eventually catching up from times agone. Phyllis had crossed important people, ruined lives, exposed secrets. It didn't take important imagination to believe someone might want vengeance. And Billy wasn't hysterical to say it out loud. "This isn't arbitrary," he told Jack one evening, his voice rough from prostration. "You do'n't just vanish like this unless someone wants you gone or you're running from commodity big." Jack looked at him precisely. "And which do you suppose it is?" Billy dithered for a bit of a alternate. "That's what scares me. It could be both." That possibility dallied between them like a storm pall ready to burst. As further time passed, the emotional risk came insolvable to ignore. Jack set up himself drifting into recollections he hadn't redefined in times, moments with Phyllis that were complicated, messy, but incontrovertibly real. Their connection had no way been simple. It had been filled with passion, conflict, remission, and heartache. Yet through it each, there had always been commodity that pulled them back into each other's route. And now she was gone. Billy's recollections were just as tangled. He flashed back the fire in her, the way she challenged him, pushed him, understood corridor of him that others didn't. He also flashed back the chaos, the consequences, the damage left before. But none of that signified now. What signified was chancing her. And time was slipping. Also, just when it sounded like they were running in circles, commodity changed. It wasn't important, just a small, nearly insignificant detail that surfaced during one of Billy's more aggressive inquiries. Someone had seen Phyllis the night she faded, not just seen her, but seen her with someone differently. A man. Strange. Tense. The kind of commerce that didn't look friendly. Billy seized on it incontinently. Who's he? He demanded. The substantiation couldn't say. The lighting had been poor, the moment detail. But there was commodity about the description, commodity that didn't sit right. It wasn't just that Phyllis had been with someone unknown. It was the way she had looked. Jack and Billy shifted their focus, zeroing in on this new piece of the mystification. They worked to reconstruct the timeline, tracking movements, cross-referencing locales, trying to identify anyone who matched the vague description. It was meticulous work, filled with frustration and false leads, but it was commodity. And commodity was better than nothing. As they dug deeper, another unsettling detail surfaced. Phyllis had been probing commodity before she dissolved. Still. Intimately. She hadn't told anyone, not Jack, not Billy, not indeed those closest to her. But traces of it were there, hidden in her recent exertion. Calls made to figures that didn't belong to her usual circle. Meetings that sounded out of place. Fractions of a mystification she had been trying to break alone. Jack felt a bite run through him as the consummation settled in. She knew commodity, he said still. Or she was about to. Billy's expression hardened. And someone made sure she didn't get the chance to finish. The counter-accusations were clear, and dangerous, however, also whoever was involved wasn't going to back down fluently, if Phyllis had uncovered commodity big enough to put her in detriment's way. This wasn't just about chancing her presently. It was about understanding what she had stumbled into. And whether they were formally too late. The pressure escalated snappily. Jack began to worry not just about Phyllis, but about Billy as well. His family's grim pursuit of the verity was applaudable but reckless. Billy wasn't allowing about consequences. He was charging forward, driven by emotion, and that kind of approach could fluently put him in the same peril Phyllis had faced. Meanwhile, the rest of Genoa City began to feel the ripple goods of Phyllis's exposure. Rumors spread. Enterprise grew. People started asking questions that didn't have answers. And with each passing day, the sense of apprehension only strengthened. Phyllis Summers had always been numerous effects, unpredictable, brilliant, intrepid, but unnoticeable was no way one of them, and the longer her absence stretched across Genoa City like a gathering storm, the further that single, insolvable verity began to unravel everything people allowed. They knew about her. It wasn't just that she was gone, it was how fully she had dissolved, as though someone had reached into the fabric of her life and pulled her out without disturbing the vestments around her. No digital footmark, no rumored farewell, no trail of chaos left behind, just a nipping void where her presence used to be. And in a city where secrets had a way of surfacing no matter how deeply they were buried, that kind of exposure didn't feel natural. It felt finagled. Deliberate. Dangerous. Jack Abbott couldn't shake the feeling that every fleeting hour was a step closer to commodity unrecoverable. What had started as quiet concern had evolved into a grim, eating urgency that refused to let him rest. He moved through his days with a forced countenance, handling business calls and meetings with rehearsed ease, but behind that calm surface was a mind contending through possibilities, each one darker than the last. He replayed every commerce he'd had with Phyllis in recent weeks, searching for cracks in the face, moments where she might have suggested it trouble, indeed subtly. But that was the problem with Phyllis. She thrived in chaos. She danced on the edge of peril like it was alternate nature. And because of that, it was nearly insolvable to distinguish between her usual unpredictability and a genuine cry for help. Billy Abbott, meanwhile, had abandoned any pretense of normality. His world had narrowed to a single ideal: find Phyllis, no matter the cost. Sleep came voluntary. Tolerance came absent. He chased every lead with reckless determination, pushing people harder than he should, crossing lines that others would vacillate to approach. But Billy didn't watch about lines, not presently. Not when Phyllis was out there nearly, conceivably in peril, conceivably alone. His feelings were an unpredictable blend of wrathfulness, fear, and guilt, and they fueled every decision he made. Because beneath all the history, all the complicated layers of their relationship, there was one inarguable verity: he couldn't stand the study of losing her like this. As the disquisition strengthened, the pieces of the mystification refused to fit together. Rather of forming a clear picture, they created more confusion, further contradictions. One substantiation claimed Phyllis had sounded agitated the night she faded, glancing over her shoulder as if she anticipated someone to be there. Another claimed she looked focused, determined, like she was on the verge of commodity important. And also there were the inconsistencies in her movements, places she had visited that didn't align with her usual routine, calls made to connections that didn't live in any egregious environment. It was as though she had been operating in a resemblant interpretation of her life, one that no bone differently had access to. It had been located on a quiet stretch of road just outside the megacity limits, situated in a way that sounded nearly purposeful, neither abandoned in fear nor left carelessly. The keys were still in the ignition. The motorist's door slightly ajar. But there was no sign of struggle. No broken glass. No blood. Nothing that screamed violence. And that made it indeed more unsettling. Jack stood there, gaping at the vehicle as if it might offer answers simply by being. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. However, why leave the auto like this? Why not carry it more convincingly, or hide it entirely? And if she had left on her own, why walk down without taking anything with her? If someone had taken Phyllis. Billy saw it else. This is a communication, he said, his voice low and tense. Whoever did this, they want us to know she's gone. Jack turned to him sprucely. Or she wants us to suppose that. Billy shook his head. No. This doesn't feel like her. This feels like someone playing with us. That idea dallied, heavy and unsettling. Because if Billy was right, if someone was designedly manipulating the situation, also this wasn't just about Phyllis presently. It was about control. Power. And whoever held it was staying one step ahead. As investigators trolled through the auto, another detail surfaced, one that transferred a bite through both men. Phyllis's phone wasn't there. It hadn't been left behind, like everything differently. It was missing. Which meant one thing. Wherever Phyllis was, if she was still alive, her phone might be the only link to chancing her. That possibility reignited their determination with renewed intensity. Jack began coordinating with tech specialists, trying to track any signal, any digital trace that could point them in the right direction. Billy doubled down on his ground position hunt, reconsidering locales, re-questioning substantiations, refusing to let any detail slip through the cracks. And also, just when it sounded like they were chasing murk again, the break came. A clunk. Detail. Weak. Nearly inappreciable. But real. Jack's phone lit up with the announcement, and for a moment everything additional faded into the background. His heart pounded as he goggled at the screen, recycling what it meant. This wasn't a coexistence. This wasn't a glitch. This was Phyllis. Or at least, it was her phone. He called Billy incontinently, his voice tight with urgency as he bared the information. There was no vacillation on the other end, no questions, no mistrustfulness. Just action. Within twinkles, they were both on their way, contending toward the position where the signal had appeared. It wasn't far, but it wasn't close enough moreover. Every alternate felt stretched, every detention unsupportable. Business lights came obstacles. Distance came an adversary. Neither of them spoke much during the drive. Because both